Welcome to another episode of the Workplace Insights podcast. Each episode I try to bring different angles, and that's certainly the case with Lisa today. So we talk about workplace design as a workplace designer's point of view on workplace technology. It's an interesting way to come at it. So here's our conversation. Thanks for joining us, Lisa.
It's a pleasure.
So I want to talk about design briefly. I mean, that's your area of expertise.
Yeah.
I read an article recently along the lines of the age of average, everything looking the same, sounding the same, and in terms of architecture, taking inspiration from cafes in Brooklyn, and that sort of spread to restaurants, which spread to workplaces. I feel like for a little while there, all workplaces look the same. What are your comments on this?
Yeah, I love that you've brought that up because we are seeing that across the board, particularly in Australia. I think if we see another archway or millennial pink, we might need to diversify there. I mean, I talked a lot about the physical design in terms of the function of spaces to suit various work styles and the spaces and tools we need, probably because, for me, good design is a given. But if we talk about that unique solution to each project, yes, we're going to find out what all the physical needs of the team are, but also, and so equally important, being how people feel within the space. So we're hearing a lot about, can we have it fun? Is it vibrant? Can there be fresh air? There's a lot of things that we got to experience when we were working outside the office. And even just to open a window, whether you're in a house or an apartment or whatever that might be, a vista to some green space, be able to just open the door and walk out. So how do we design to perhaps have some of those elements, come into the workplace? But what is the design? What is the concept behind the design? And that needs to be unique for every organisation. Yeah. You're asking the organisation or the leaders that you're briefing with, what are the objectives for this workplace design? What do you want to show your customers? How do you want your customers to feel when they come to your workplace? How do you want your people to feel? And what do you want to portray? I mean, they're all really important questions that then you can design to. It's not just, I would say my colleagues, most designers, whether it's residential, workplace, hospitality, you are designing to the brief of the client, and really important to understand what that is and then design to that. Hopefully by doing that, we can have less of the same, because there's so much people looking at everyone's great work, and then it's hard to switch that off and not, subconsciously then design
perhaps
that.
There's a similar challenge to what I was mentioning about technology vendors getting in the way sometimes. They're selling you things to be a certain way because that's how they need it to be to sell it. It matches their business model, desks and rooms. So you have a desk and room focused solution. I know a lot of furniture vendors get involved in workplace design, and perhaps they actually do the design because it leads to them selling the furniture.
Yes.
And then everything looks the same if it's the same catalogue from the same vendors.
Looks like a workstation showroom. I mean, it happens a lot in the US, actually.
Yeah.
I think the aesthetic is so important. And certainly the influence of residential is coming through, but we're not trying to make the workplace look like your house. Well, I'm not. I don't think that is the approach. It's what are all the things that are going to go into this workplace, and then how does that all look and feel? And to be, I had a few people saying, can we make sure we have good quality chairs? Not the cheap chairs that break all the time. And it comes down to that, really small, because what does this mean for me? People want to be proud of their environment. They want to walk into that space and go, I love it, it's exciting, it's fun, it's vibrant, those kinds of things. But you also have, in the same group, you might have someone say, I just want it to be calm.
Yeah.
I'm designing a workplace at the moment for people who they develop aged care facilities, and they're bringing their whole team together to work in one location, and they want a calm space which has all the things that they need, but environment that they feel energized to for the work that they're doing. They're coming together and they want this beautiful environment so that will then enhance the way they deal with their customers. And their customers are those elderly people who are moving into their next, house or apartment or what have you. So we can't underestimate the value of how we feel within our space in terms of aesthetic to how we then work with each other and work with our customers.
And I guess making deliberate choices, not just following design trends because you like Toby's estate in Brooklyn,
It's certainly not about your favourite colour.
Yeah.
And I mean, colour, people are craving colour, I think. I mean, I think people are a bit over the tone on tone and beige on beige and timber. I think that's really important, but there's also how can you use colour in space to or different textures and materials and things to create that vibrancy and interest, and do that in a way where it's not too polarizing. You learn over the years about the polarizing colours, like green seems to be one of those colours that and you wouldn't necessarily use red in a meeting room. I mean, they're pretty basic things, but it does matter so much. And one little thing in terms of how we're working with online meetings that I've really noticed, and I noticed when I was sitting in a very beige hotel room in quarantine for a long time, is how much that affects you and your dealings. When you're meeting with someone online and they just have a white background, I mean, I know everyone plays around with their backgrounds and things, which is great, and probably really important. But a white background can just be really kind of unmotivating or something like that's what you're looking at. So I'm really conscious in design now about how you design the finish of the walls to a meeting space or a little quiet room or something like that.
For the far end.
Yeah.
In the, my background's in audio and acoustics, and we always said like what you do in your space is more for them than it is for you because it's improving the what you're transmitting to the far end. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I will look at what's in my background before I join a meeting, and I'll see the white wall and go, okay, I need to just have a plant or a bookshelf or something in the background that isn't white that someone's looking at. I
Interesting point. I'm gonna look at my background at home and see how I can improve.
Well, I think I mean, for designers, we want to design beautiful spaces, but we want to design spaces that work for people.
Yeah, there's a function to that.
Yeah, it's that balance, it's quality of design and the longevity. So yes, let's not design to trend, design to the brief, create the environment that's required, but with good quality material and product for longevity. We talk about environmental design, and what can you take with you when you go? Should we be doing as much custom joinery as I love custom joinery and it works because you're designing things into certain spaces, but is there a modularity to that so that you can actually take things apart? I'm not saying everything needs to be taken apart. I just mean, like, how do we think about design in terms of being more environmentally conscious and taking things with us? So,
in my opinion, is why workplace designers and consultants are critical and more relevant than ever before in this space, because how do we even know what spaces we need? Like, how do I know my work style? What if I don't have experience knowing what's best for me, or how I'm most productive or happy, or are my assumptions correct? Are they tested with science? How do you get started on something so complex?
Well, I guess that's step one to the process, is engaging with the people who are going to be using that environment. I think, in the past decade or perhaps two that I've been working in this space, briefing for physical design of workplace was very, very straightforward. How many photocopies do you need and how many meetings do you have? Are you mostly on the phone or at your desk? Is quite straightforward in that sense. I think workplace design is even more important, and it's much more exciting than it ever has been right now. And what we're being able to do is engage with a lot more people within that business. So instead of perhaps meeting only with a core group of property, part of the property team, the facilities managers, human resources, and senior people, now we're having the advantage of meeting with a variety of people within the organisation, from the most, the least experienced person in the organisation to the most experienced person, and at all different levels.
Yep.
So they're providing these really rich, deep conversations about how everybody is navigating work now. And that's really fascinating and really important. So if I'm working with a client and they ask what is the first step, it's let's set up some workshop style interviews, and I suggest who should be involved. So, can we have a cross-section of your business? And I recently was working on an accommodation brief with a client, and so they refer to their leaders as their people leaders. Mm-hmm. But what was important was to meet with those people leaders, but that their leaders would engage with their team as well and bring to those sessions what everyone in the team was thinking about what the objectives for their future workplace might be.
Yeah.
So that's a really long answer.
It's interesting. I like the comment on bringing in the least experience and the most experience, because I bet both have assumptions about each other. And if they're together, perhaps in the same workshop even, or the same room, they can learn from each other. Like perhaps the least experience is learning what they don't know. You only know what you know. And they might not realize how much is involved in this sort of thing, and what they need to be successful in work. And the person with the most experience, sometimes experience is a biased, right? And you might not see how young people, perhaps if they're the least experienced, how young people, what they need and how they wish to perform or want to work.
Yeah, we did some research around 2020 through to now to see how what the sentiments from an organisation point of view and from an individual's point of view are. And I think it's interesting to see a lot of that connect, and it's really exciting that individual sentiment is connecting with the sentiment of organisations. I think it's when it gets down to a bit more of a micro level, that's where it starts to change. So I think everybody has agreed that being in the workplace is desired for human connection, to be able to collaborate together to do all those things. But on an individual level, it's but what really works for me. I know it needs to work for the organisation that I'm a part of, but I'd like to tell my leader, how I like to work and what really motivates me. So it's finding the connection between those two to be able to create the best environment. And that's what's going to motivate people to want to be together, if they know that they will have an environment that's conducive to how they work.
Yeah.
In order to benefit the organisation, because we need to keep that in focus.
How much of the organisation plays a role into what they end up with? Like, workplace design. Design's the key word, not workplace templating, right? Like,
yes.
So every organization's different.
Mm-hmm.
How different are they? Are you seeing a lot of transferable elements? Are you discovering the same thing every time you work with a certain type of customer?
I think, so first and foremost, every organisation is unique. Anyone that thinks they can design a workplace to a type of template will not be successful, in my opinion. I think that what I am seeing as commonalities across organisations, you used to kind of see a particular type for a financial organisation or a professional services organisation. A tech company was a certain style, law practices were a certain style. What I'm now seeing is across all of those, the variety of sectors, is there are commonalities in terms of the space that people are looking for. And what will be unique is the quantity of those spaces, the the size, the proportion of space of those, and then what are the tools that you need within those spaces, whether it's kind of analog, whiteboard type stuff or technology, or both.
Yeah.
So the commonalities would be, so we were just talking before about what we hear most of all is people really want to come and be together and work in an environment together. They just want that flexibility to be able to work in another location if they need to, for whatever reason that might be, that, to get their work done. So that might be at home, that might be in another location altogether. So when they're coming into the workplace, they're looking to be able to find places to collaborate with their team. So not only do they need to collaborate and to have great sessions and share ideas and all those kinds of things, but while you're in the office, you still need to get other work done. So where do you then go and find that environment to do more individual work? So the commonality is, great reconfigurable collaboration spaces so that you can kind of maneuver furniture or whatever those tools are to be able to be the best environment for your team to do their work, but also then be able to go and find somewhere where you can dock in, perhaps have dual screens, work on something in a really concentrated way. So they are common.
Often like immediately before or after, right? Like collaboration you don't just go into a room and everything's sorted at the end of that collaboration session. That creates a lot of focus work that you have to follow up with, or the planning work before the collaboration event.
Yeah.
Are you constantly battling assumptions, like people assuming the workplace is for a certain thing and then finding out that there's more to it than that?
It's an interesting question.
Such as collaboration, right? At work, a lot of people think, the workplace is now for meeting people and socializing. But it's also a great place to get some work done.
Yes. So I think if the assumption is that it's for collaboration, that from my experience, that would be an incorrect assumption, that you need to cover all the different types of work that you would do. I think what's really important, we were talking about that with briefing, is and learning from everybody in the organisation, whether that's everyone in the organisation, because you could do a survey and everyone gets a voice, and then those more smaller group workshop type things, is that understanding what are the different work styles within your business. So I think for a long time we're kind of assuming, there's people that are collaborative in their work and there's people that work individually.
Yes.
But I think what's been fantastic to really, we probably already knew this, we just never, dive deep enough.
Or thought about it.
Is understanding that there might be 4 or 5 predominant work styles within your organisation. Through those engagement sessions, if you can define what those work styles are and then understand what the tools are to support people in those various work styles.
Someone at the door.
Come in.
Bad timing for a plumber.
That's a good blooper.
One of the assumptions that I see is like assigning a personality to a role that doesn't equal the real world. For example, PlaceOS is a software company. Software includes sales and developers, and a lot of people think sales or extroverts that need social energy and need to be around each other, and developers like to sit at home in a room by themselves with headphones on and not communicate with anyone. But what is true is often the complete flip of that, where developers is a very collaborative thing. Like you're always using someone else's code to some level. You're always looking things up and talking to someone else that has had similar problems. And it's like that all day long for developers, that they hit roadblocks constantly and need people to help them get through that, both technically and even from like a emotional setting, like just having a soundboard for their issues. So I think I see a lot of assumptions in workplace design, and And I see it internally as well, where people think, oh, you got to treat different roles differently, and therefore they need different space. But I guess we can break down all of our days or activities in the same way.
Yes. I mean, and that's where understanding what those work styles are come in. So if you can define the various work styles, so take the two that you just used as examples, a sales team which is highly mobile in and out, to a developer who is doing very desk-based work. If you can define, which you will be able to define the work style, then you've got something tangible that you can start to design to. And those work styles that you design to are really going to suit the majority of your organisation, because you'll be able to find a fit in some way. When you talk about those assumptions, the project I just completed is for a tech company, trying to understand how much space they need because they'd like to go to market to find new premises.
Yeah.
One of the most important things that organisations are grappling with right now in terms of how much space I need. So you've got a large proportion of that organisation are developers. They are people who are desk-based, who are crunching numbers on all different levels.
Yeah.
What was interesting in the interviews was that, and this is where the discussion of diversity, neurodiversity came up, where there's a lot of introverts in that team, but not everyone in that role is an introvert. Mm-hmm. So there's a predominant amount of that team who would like to do their work from home. They'd like to be able to be in their environment, but they really want to be in the office as well.
Yeah.
But what they want to know is, when I come in, will there be a space for me that suits the way I work? So that description that you just had of the developers and constantly problem solving, that's a commonality, I think, for a lot of people in a whole lot of different roles, because that ability to share knowledge just where you're sitting, even if you're not engaging in the conversation, just to be amongst it and to be a part of it and hear what other people are doing. I mean, you can't do that when you're siloed in another location and have an understanding of what your fellow colleagues are working on. I mean, it's so important to have
even
that.
Things like a little less tangible, like being around people that are all working and that there's energy from that. And like, let's say let's use a programmer example. Let's say you're hitting walls and you can't get through these current problems, but you're surrounded by other developers just working and getting it done. And you just feel like, okay, I can do it. Everyone's doing their job.
Yeah, and we're part of a team.
I can hear some typing going, I'm not alone.
Yes.
I feel like it's a different feeling if you're in a dark room by yourself and hitting the same issues compared to a well-lit office surrounded by colleagues also going through that. And I think there's another assumption there. There's like two levels of some of these assumptions. Like first, guessing what their personality type is like, so introvert, but then also guessing what do introverts need. Introverts are still people. Just because they're introverted doesn't mean they don't need social interaction.
It's not one type of introvert. And that's where those conversations come in. So let's not assume anything or guess anything. If you can engage with your team, like start now, even if you're not thinking of a move, you can make small changes to your environment with the tools that you have, the furniture and the tools that you have right now. If you can start talking with the people that work with you, which, you all work together to achieve whatever that purpose is for your organisation, is understand what it means to different people and then design to that. So, as an example, again, of the developer environment or whoever that might be, in a recent project where the team space is reconfigurable. I'm not talking about the fact that everything's on wheels. It's more that the work points themselves, the workstations, you can actually move them around for your team. So some teams might come into that environment and just use it exactly the way it is.
Yeah.
Other teams, and particularly a tech team, came into that environment and they actually moved all the desks around the space so they were sitting side by side each other for exactly what you just described. Yeah. They want to be able to be sitting and working individually, but be able to say, hey, what do you think about that? Or can you have a look at this? You stand up and look at my screen, or you just turn to each other. So when we were talking before about the types of spaces in the workplace, and there's a lot that needs to be conducive for collaboration. That's not necessarily like a meeting space for collaboration where you kind of go and put your collaboration hat on and that's what happens.
Yeah.
It's how do you design team space, because that's the predominant thing in right now that I see, is it's not where do I go to work collaboratively? Where do I go to work individually? It's like, where am I going to find my team? And so if that team space can be able to be adapted to suit your needs, that's going to be more successful than if space is static and has to be in a certain way. I mean, we've had all these preconceived ideas about what work is and how you do it. And I think that the last few years has given us this opportunity just to relax a bit and kind of say, well, what do we need? And then, test things. Why do we have to find a solution and that's it?
Yeah. How does this come back to real estate? So you mentioned one of the outcomes for that particular study workshop you're doing for a client was how much space do they need? Should the question be more like, how many different types of spaces do I need? Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it needs to come down to like something the CFO understands, like cost per square foot or square meter.
Yes.
How do you translate it down to something like that? Or is that metric not relevant anymore? You're looking more for flex leasing and more something new in the real estate side?
I think that it still comes down to what is that overall amount of square meters that our organisation requires. But what goes into that becomes more micro to get to that number. Mm-hmm. So we're no longer just saying, okay, you have 400 people, it's 10 square meters per person or per work point, depending on how you're going to work. It really comes down to understanding what the utilisation of your workspace is today and what your team are talking about that being in the future. So if I provide an example from that project, those interviews were also an opportunity, the interviews with the people leaders was an opportunity to say, how many days are you working in the office currently? And then into the future, let's imagine that you have a workplace that provides all the spaces and tools that you need. How much would you like to be working in the office? That gives us some data to understand and then work from on that basis. We also have just the simple swipe card data of who's coming in, how many people are coming in on any given day. So you can look at that raw data against what people are telling you in an interview workshop type environment and then make some decisions around that. So you might look around your current workspace and say, like this organisation is, and say we're getting 30% on the busiest day, we're getting 30% of our whole workforce into the office. So we don't need all this space. Mm-hmm. Well, what do we need it for? But when you have the workshop sessions, the team will tell you that the reason why they're not coming in is because they don't have the space that they need to do their particular role within that business.
Yeah.
So you have to look at the data as a really important piece, but you also have to talk to people and then make your own observations and then present that back to the organisation and say, well, this is what we're hearing. Does that sound right to you at an organisational level for the leaders? Is this what you want for your organisation? Is this how you're going to carry forward?
I guess part of the challenge here is if you're now saying, well, you don't have the right type of space, you have to work out how to provide that space with what you already have or even less space, right? So if they ultimately want less real estate and they don't have the spaces needed to bring people in, then they have to repurpose existing space. Yes.
So, you mentioned flexible leases. I think it would be great to get someone from, a leasing agent to talk about what that means today. Because that is what people that I meet with, the CEOs that are trying to determine, or the COO determining how much space they need. That's the question. Is there a way that the building owner can provide us with some flexibility so we don't have to take 10 floors, and then what if we contract and then we have to sublet that floor, or, so what is the new way?
Particularly long-term leases too, and leases historically have been long-term for enterprise customers as anchor tenants in brand new high-rise buildings. So that if they want that flexibility up front, like that's pretty hard to plan 10 years ahead for your employee numbers and what space they need.
Yes, I mean, look what happened over the last decade in terms of organisations with large amounts of real estate, and then all of a sudden contracting quite considerably. I think there's a lot of talk at the moment about consolidation. Certainly, in conversations with, property, the concern that organisations are contracting, quite a lot of space. That example that I was providing before about you seeing 30% of your headcount, say, being in the office, that doesn't mean that then you would go looking for that amount of space.
Yes.
It's a pretty dangerous thing, in my opinion, to just treat this as a contraction or consolidation exercise. Because what you will find when you engage with a team is what are all those spaces that people are looking for. And a lot of those spaces are larger than they have been before. So how do you provide an area where, because you have a large part of your organisation working out of the office, when they're coming in, you want to have that kind of all hands meeting, that whole team, or teams of 20 to 40 people getting together, and space that you can reconfigure. So you might start by looking at, should I say, bums on seats, and then say, but what are the types of spaces? Therefore, we probably need to be providing a greater amount of space, or we do need to provide a greater amount of space. And what is our growth projection for the organisation? So what is the 3-5 year growth? And even, most organisations won't be looking beyond 3 to 5 years. But you don't want to define what space needs you want right now without understanding what that growth is. And then within a year, you've already run out of space.
It's interesting to see that happening. When I first started in the industry of workplace or smart buildings, it was almost the other thing happening, where we're rolling out lots of small meeting rooms and getting rid of the large ones because they were underutilized. So that the larger spaces, except for some exceptions with the likes of PwC and some of the business consulting firms, that hands-on workshops were always a big part of what they do. So they had that for the client-facing spaces, but not for their own internal usage. But I guess now it's just thinking about space differently, bigger, more flexible, rather than a bunch of little rooms to have conferences on, where you could just do that from your own device anyway. Yeah,
and I think you just made a really good point about the smaller spaces. So, and I'll come back to that in a minute. When you're creating that space that people are going to if you're doing this really fantastic engagement process, which is setting you up for success.
Yeah.
And right now you have a lot of people who are preferring to work from home because they don't feel like they have the tools and the spaces they need in the workplace. When you design that future workplace for them and it's day one and people are coming in and experiencing that environment, prepare for that success, because you will find that, those leaders who are willing to invest in the environment, I mean, that's the best thing you can be doing right now in the continued war for talent. Is if you can provide that great experience, people will want to be there and naturally want to be there, rather than have to pull people in, or you don't have to provide any other incentive but the workplace itself to bring people in if it's designed the right way. Yes, because it's not just the design alone, it's how that works operationally. I mean, I know you know this, but operationally, but also the technology and how you're going to work in a connected way from that point of view. So it's all encompassing. It's not just the physical design, but if you can tap into what that experience is that your people are looking for, and you can provide that for them, and then continue to adapt the space as, you know, people start to work in it and realize that some spaces you use better than others. You know, be prepared to continue to change. I don't think your day one answer, and this will happen, you know, well into the future. I think if what I believe is that workplace will continue to evolve, workplace design will continue to evolve. It has done for decades. I think that there's a more rapid rate of change in terms of workplace design now.
Agree.
So it's kind of like, you know, from our first mobile phone, how quickly technology advanced, or even from the first television to how quickly technology has advanced. I think that's the rate of change.
From my point of view, from the technology point of view, it's exactly why we sort of pride ourselves on being a platform versus an app, because platforms can adapt. You can add to it, you can take away from it, you can change everything without losing the underlying connectivity and integration. Where there's so many desk booking apps on the market, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes their point of difference is very specific to a moment in time. Like a lot of point of differences might be, I can say when I'm working from home, I can put my working from home schedule in the app.
Yes.
But that's just very narrow thinking. It's just like, well, I can just tell my team when I'm working from home. It can be more dynamic than that. It doesn't have to be like, here are the 3 days a week I work in the office and the days I work from home. It's like a constant trap people get in, like just throwing closed box solutions around things, either an app or literally sometimes a closed box in meeting rooms. It's. I feel like conversely, everything you're saying, you could be in such a trap where, let's say your example where only 30% of the people are coming in, and you just look at that only. You go get space that's suitable for 30% of the people. It's just a smaller version of what you already have. So maybe fewer people start coming in because it's just more of the same and not successful.
Exactly.
So like you could just keep downsizing until there is no purpose for your office.
Yes.
Or you take the workplace design approach, you get it right, more people come in and you might end up needing more space eventually.
I think 2 words you just used, dynamic and purpose. So I think essentially you've got to understand, I mentioned that before, understand what the purpose is of this move for the organisation. What are you all trying to achieve as a business? And then when you define that purpose, then every individual and every team can then find a connection to that purpose. And that's going to help. I mean, that's not about physical workplace design, but that's part of these discussions.
Yep.
It's about, if I feel connected and feel valued as part of this organisation, that's going to motivate me even more to want to be a part of it and want to be together with my team. The other trap, and you mentioned being dynamic, is that space needs to be dynamic. If you define the space that you need so tightly that you're not setting yourself up for success, that more people than you think are going to come in to the environment, but also you don't want to be managing it at a micro level. So you've got teams saying that they would like to be in the office somewhere between 1 and 3 days a week. But within a team, someone might be 1 day, someone else might be 3 days, and they're not all coming in on particular days. So if you've so tightly worked out how much space the organisation needs based on numbers alone, then you're setting yourself up to fail. So you need an environment where, if there are many people are coming in on events basis, so if there's a great big team thing happening but most of my work is done at home and I'm coming in for that, you've got to prepare that, you know, not everybody will be in, but a large number of people will be there, and ensuring that you have enough what I call other seats. So you have the settings or the work points that might be a more collaborative environment where you're sitting at a desk but you still have a screen. You might have that more individual environment. So you have those types of settings, but also, you know, all the space that's in the social areas, you know, the kitchen, the breakout, all the open collaborative settings. You know, a sales team might just be coming, and in the case of the project I was mentioning, they come in 1 day a week where they all come in together and talk about what they're all doing, and then they need to be on the road, if you like.
Yeah.
So when they come back in, they want to be able to find that place to be. So if they all come in on a Monday, and that's a large team, but there's also other teams that love coming in on a Monday, dare I say it, 'cause
Yeah.
mainly it's Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, then you need to be designing for that. And then just coming back to what you were saying about the smaller spaces, I think that is a given. We're coming into the office, but we still have a lot of online meetings, and a lot of them are one-on-one or small groups. So where do you do those settings without interrupting everybody that is around you? So that is one of the most common requests across all sectors of business is, where can I have just a small space that I can pop into just to do some quiet work because I really need to concentrate, or I need to do the Teams meeting but I don't want to interrupt people around me.
Does it necessarily have to be a dedicated space? I mean, if it's just me on the call, I could do that from my desk. And if the environment, if this is a certain part of the office where it can be a little bit noisy, perhaps there's some sound masking, so the sound doesn't travel very far. That could have more people than a dedicated room that could be purpose for something else.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about my own work style, right?
Yeah.
And how we work here in this office. Sometimes we're in meetings together and we're doing it from our desk because there's a couple of remote people and there's two people here in the office, and we don't bother going to a room. We just stay at our desk because everything's set up with multiple monitors and our headphones and everything.
Yeah, I am actually finding it quite amusing that now happens. It's like we've all formed a new habit where we got so used to meeting on Teams that even when the same thing has happened to me, you'd be in the meeting room with a couple of other people and then realise one of your team members is still sitting at their desk and you're like, hey, we're all together, why don't you come and join?
I mean, it's just the modern day phone call, right? Like not every office had somewhere to take a private phone call constantly. You're just on the phone at your desk. Yes.
I think that there is a heightened sensitivity about noise. Now, I experience it as well. You got very used to, well, I had a quiet space. Not everyone does, but I had a quiet space at home to work. And so when I was back in the workplace, I loved it. I was dying to be there. But I found that I was quite sensitive to the conversations around me to be able to do work in a concentrated way. So I think, and what I've just been hearing just in the last couple of weeks from this particular organisation is, can there just be somewhere where I can just easily pop into because I do want to just have four walls around me? What's happening now is a lot of people are on team in this organisation, and I think it's across the board, are having an online meeting, but they're taking up a room that's can have 6-8 people in them or even more, because that's the only room that's available. The reason that they're saying that they're going into that room is because they feel that they're interrupting people nearby. So it's not necessarily they don't want to have that call at their desk. They actually would like to be able to, but they feel, in respect to the people around them, that perhaps they should remove themselves, because I think we all know that we often, I'm probably talking quite loud now, we tend to talk loudly when we're on the phone, as though it needs to reach the other person on the other side.
And perhaps one becomes self-conscious of what they're saying and feel like people are listening, which happens,
definitely.
Right? You can't help but listen to people have a conversation.
Yeah, there's one thing to the conversation is confidential, and there's another that you're just a bit self-conscious about.
You don't perform as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you've got to provide for both. In order to solve what's happening in the open environment is perhaps breaking space down. So, we've had all of these really big open plan workspaces with rows and rows and rows of workstations. Like, I am cheering the current environment right now because it means less rows and rows of desks, more of a variety of... there has been a variety of spaces for a while, but still this kind of fixation on density of 10 square metres per work point has led to rows and rows of workstations. So now having, this so much more dynamic and landscape of space is meaning that you can break down the areas where people are working closely together and be able to treat those spaces acoustically, whether that's, particular acoustic wall panelling, what you specify for ceilings and floors, to be able to, and perhaps sound masking, because you want the buzz, you don't want the dead quiet.
Yeah, 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
So is that where the space is coming from? Because you've mentioned conflicting things in a way that we need more smaller spaces for online meetings and more larger spaces for collaboration.
Yeah.
So that has to come from somewhere. So it's the desks. That's what we're sacrificing, or maybe the wrong word. That's what we are repurposing because they're no longer needed.
Yeah, I think we're repurposing is a good way to describe it, because rather than seeing it as a contradiction, it's more, these are the spaces that people are asking for.
Yeah.
So one group will say, I want a great big space for 14 people that I can bring on my team together. Not just people in person, but people online as well. So we might get to that in terms of technology integration. But I also want a space where I can just jump into. People and culture team members, they're constantly having confidential conversations, and they might just want to do one-on-ones. So where can I jump into a space that's a smaller space? It's not taking up a large meeting room.
Yeah.
So there is a desire for a lot more smaller spaces, and that's what's making up your space needs brief.
Yeah.
So you're looking at the numbers as a calculation, then you're looking at all the spaces, and then it's how you design those. So there's no point having a collaboration space next to where people are trying to work, even if that work environment is a collaborative work environment. You're still, and we've seen it play out, is that people won't use those collaboration spaces because they still feel like they're too close to people working, even if it's in a collaborative way.
Yeah.
So how do you design the right location for those spaces?
With the flow and the traffic and the...
Exactly. You've got to look at...
before and after, the green room sort of situation. Yeah. I had something I was going to say and I forgot.
I was just going to mention the integration of the technology, because you said something before about...
I want to talk about technology actually and business models, but yeah.
It's my, I've told you this, it's my little kind of secret nerdiness that I love the technology as well as the design. One of the common comments that's coming up is, how do we want to collaborate with the team, but inevitably not everyone's going to be together. It's not just because somebody's working from home necessarily. It might be because someone is on a business trip traveling and they're connecting in. We've been doing this for a long time before the whole work from home. So I don't necessarily talk about work from home. It's where you are working, because it could...
That's actually that was my biggest adjustment over the COVID period, that I wasn't traveling. I was traveling so extensively that became my habit for working. I got most of my work done at airport lounges and hotel lobbies. Yeah. And I actually love that environment.
Same.
The hotel lobby is full of activity, and for some reason I find that great for focus work if there's lots of noise and activity around me. Mm-hmm. And then coming home to work, I was just like, I just don't know what to do. I'm so easily distracted. It's too quiet. There's too many other things I could be doing. Like I could be doing a load of washing or something. Yeah. So that we have all been working remotely for a long time, particularly in software, right? Like there's been
many roles.
Yeah, of course. But I think remote working was a trend already in Silicon Valley, and by ripple effect, the IT and software industry.
I prefer that word, remote.
Yeah.
I think working from home was a period of time that we've just kind of hung on to a bit of a label.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the label, which is why I talk about the fact that we need to provide unique solutions and realise that they are going to continue to change. But in terms of those spaces and talking about tech and analogue tools, people want the space to come together and collaborate, but they want to collaborate with people online. What perhaps hasn't been solved yet, or maybe I just haven't seen, I'm keen to ask you about it, is nothing seems to have solved the ad hoc conversation. Mm-hmm. So that whole thing that we were talking about that preference to be together so that you can hear what's going on, even though you're not part of the conversation, but then you bump into someone or you're sitting near someone, you go, hey, do you just want to talk about that thing? How do you, but then, so we're sitting near each other, we say, let's get together and talk about this. But Phoebe needs to be part of that conversation too. It would be much better if she was part of that quick conversation, but she's not here. How do we quickly grab her into the conversation? It'd be really good to see what that solution could be.
And this is related to a point I was going to bring up. You mentioned we now basically have different metrics. Let's say we're getting rid of a whole bunch of desks. A lot of technology platforms are licensed based on certain metrics, and to innovate, it's like sometimes the process is in the way, or the business model. So like ad hoc solutions are so focused on desks and rooms to capture anything in between or to capture anything ad hoc. There's no license for it in most products. And it's hard to quantify, like, how do we have a business model based on something we can't predict, or the flexibility, and some try to get around it with real-time consumption or API-based consumption. So every time you, like ChatGPT, for example, every time you use it as an integration, you're paying per request. Many platforms run that way. But how does that apply to the workplace where the vendors are getting in the way of a lot of innovation because they want you to have desks, they want you to have traditional rooms,
right?
Because if they don't, they can't sell you something.
Yeah, interesting.
And I'm seeing, vendors have a lot of influence because the salespeople sometimes play this pseudo consulting role that's very biased to whatever they're selling. But technology is flashy and gets meetings and interest, and they can set up demos, and then people just focus on this area rather than taking a workplace design approach.
Yes.
All this to say, ad hoc is not easy from the business side of things, as well as the technical challenges that it introduced. But I think the business the model needs some attention, and what we're trying to achieve at Place OS is more of like a platform-based business model. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to business models, and I love the idea of like an ecosystem where there's lots of different ways to consume, and being an operating system for others to find the value and work out the best way to charge for it, because it's their product that's being enabled by this platform.
Yeah, that's interesting, because often as a user, you don't necessarily think about how someone is selling that. You're just saying, this is the tool that I want. And another common thing that's coming through in these conversations, when you talk about technology, I would say that about 3 words come up time and time again: seamless, frictionless, and easy. So how do you provide, because I like what you're talking about in terms of there's might be a kind of a few different systems that tie in together to enable you to do that, as long as it's really easy. So the current solution, I think, for ad hoc that I use myself is you just pick up the phone, you FaceTime someone.
Yes.
Or WhatsApp them or whatever.
Yeah. Why do we need to follow a process? Like, you don't have to create a process that doesn't need to be there.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of apps are that way. We have a workplace app as a package, but in a way, I feel like that the life cycle of that is short compared to the platform that will continue to live on and tackle the next challenge. And I think there should be no interface to a completely frictionless user experience. It should be interfaces we're already using, or just being somewhere and the space reacting to you. So that's the ultimate goal. So complete no touch. So and if you are interacting, it's probably going to be a chat-based user experience. That's pretty much guaranteed in the not too distant future.
And let's not overcomplicate it and make it this kind of I mean, it's
Yeah.
right down to, you know, when I go into a room and I want to connect to the AV system, I just want to plug in one thing
Yeah.
to my computer and then it all just happens. I think most people now are pretty digitally savvy. So, and people just find a way. It's like you find a hack to do something. You just,
Yeah.
but
And even little things like that example I used before about using an app to say when I'm working in the office. When I'm already in Slack talking to my colleagues,
Yeah.
I'll just be like, I'm popping in tomorrow. Do you want to meet me there?
yeah,
Like it's
talking is still a really good
yes,
thing.
that's right. We can still communicate, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of this will merge. These communication tools and these apps will merge into one environment, as they have done in other industry verticals, as they're starting to do more rapidly with AI-based chat experiences.
I mean, one thing that technology might be able to help change or solve, I shouldn't say change, is that when you're setting up a meeting and you've got 10 people in that meeting and you're predominantly in the workplace or you're going in because you want to be in person with those people if you can, so you book a meeting room for 10 people. Inevitably somebody is going to not be in the room.
Yeah.
So what would be really helpful, because I'm being asked these questions, is how do you know when you send out the invite and then you get the acceptances back? You know, maybe there is a tool out there right now, but is there something that tells you how many people are going to be in person so that then you can book the appropriate room? Because that's a lot of this space use is coming down to that, is just you're booking a room for 10 people, 4 people are in person, so you could have just used a smaller room and then left that available for other people.
And you just spelled out like logic, right? You used if statements. If there's people are here, do this, change the room. Software's very good at logic. And I think delivering the just-in-time space helps a lot as well. So if that's always performed at the last minute, so your space is really dynamic, that would have the most efficient usage of space.
Yes.
There are many challenges to achieve that, like the record of truth. How do we know if someone's working from home or not? Do they tell an app? Do they tell their calendar? Do they tell someone in Slack? Do we monitor this in real time so we can just see, well, they're not here yet, so let's assume they're not coming. All of the above is possible. So,
I mean, most of the time when you accept an invitation, you kind of look at your calendar, right? And you say, can I make that or not? I mean, so you could just accept the invite, but you click a button that says, I'll be remote. Because it doesn't, to me, it doesn't matter where you are. It's, are you in person or are you not?
And this is built into all the calendar systems now. You can schedule your days where you're going to be, or you can select it per event. And that could be the record of truth, but how you can still change your mind and not bother changing the meeting invite. And that's where I think there's a real-time element needs to come into this. And this brings up privacy concerns, because we could have it where we know if they're at home or if they're on their way to work and make that guess where are they going to be today, which could be beneficial for people that have really downsized and want to make sure everyone gets allocated space, and it can happen on approach on the way to the office. So you allocate those people coming in space immediately. But that raises other user experience, the question of, just because we can do it, should we do it?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we can, that's why I said let's not make it complicated, because I think that there's fluidity in how we're wanting to work now, and perhaps how a lot of people have wanted to work. So let's just, I think the communicating with your voice, that will be a thing that we will continue to do so. No technology is going to change the fact that when we're together, we do great things.
Yes. We at Place West, we have a Google channel called Sid Office Goss, I think is the title. And it's just like what's happening in this office, and little things like, I'm taking the parking space today. We've only got one parking space, so that's what I check all the time. But we don't need apps. Communication exists, right? You can set these things up, and I guess I got one last question. We've covered most of my notes. I don't know if you have anything you also want to cover that we haven't yet. We've touched on it a little bit, but what's your personal work style?
Well, I usually say I work wherever I need to be. So if I'm doing a lot of kind of writing work, I will find I like quiet. But quiet for me is also in the cafe. As long as I can't hear like exactly the conversation someone's having, it's more of a buzz, then I love working in that type of environment. As a creative, I love being together, working with people. So I will preference going and working with a team. If there's a meeting with a client or a consultant, I'll go to their office and do that. So really it's pretty fluid for me based on what I'm doing. For my team, it's also flexible. So it's an outcomes-based approach. We know what we need to achieve. We use an app to put all our tasks in, and everyone knows what they're doing. And as long as we're hitting those targets and we're getting together when we need to be able to make those quicker decisions and do things together, you could be working from somewhere else. So I don't work with my team every day, but we say, listen, we should really get together and work on these things because it's going to be much more successful. So that's my work style. Yeah. I think really overall, if we just think about all the things that we just talked about, and the fact that I think everyone is feeling or accepting the fact that this is an evolution of the way we work, and not be so fixated in an answer day one. But we don't want things to be costly. I mean, we've come from an age where we all talked about churn and the cost of churn because you expand or contract and you have to build another meeting room or an office or something like that. We want to design space to be adaptable. I'm not saying flexible on purpose, because it's not about having spaces that everything's on wheels. It's designing space so that you can adapt space as the needs change for the business. The world is influencing change in business. The economy can be volatile, which obviously impacts business. So how do we design space that can be malleable, so that you're not having to have a timely and costly exercise to be able to make change? The whole work style, the individual, understanding what makes people tick, but I think sometimes we lose sight in talking about the individual, that after all, this is organisations that we're designing for. And if the organisation can clearly define their vision and their values and the purpose, then people that work for them can find that connection.
That's a good point. Like, not going overboard, making it customized to every single individual, because they're part of that culture. Like, they have to hopefully join the culture rather than the other way around.
Yeah, you want to be part of that culture. So if you're weighing up two identical job offers, and you are someone who does desire a level of flexibility, if one organisation is offering that and the other one's not, then which one are you going to choose? Yeah. I think also it's the values of the business. I think people are much more discerning now about the organisations that they're joining. I think they want to really understand what is the social conscience of that business. What are their ethics? Who are the partners? Who are we working with? And can I see myself? Are my values connected to the values of that organisation? Yeah. And that's why it's not physical design alone, because these conversations that we're having are so rich for all of that information. Yes, we're finding out what the physical needs are, but we're also able to define that for the leaders of the business to be able to tap into that. So we're actually providing, as workplace designers, an even richer service for the client, because we're providing them with all this other rich information that's going to help them.
I agree with that. It almost gives them a roadmap for management and leadership, not leadership, just physical workplace design.
Operational, and I think probably the last point I would make about that is that leaders are so much more exposed now. It's just been this thing that's happened. You're seeing a lot of middle management be kind of weeded out of organisations. You know, this kind of real hierarchical approach. And, you know, if leaders aren't shining, their team will let them know.
Yeah.
So I think that this is a really great opportunity for leaders to invest the time in their people understanding what they need, invest in the workplace design. I'm not talking about, you know, it doesn't have to be a big budget exercise. You can design a workplace at a variety of different budget levels depending on what you want that to be.
Yeah.
So what is the environment? What is the look and the feel that people want to be a part of? You know, is it light and bright and airy and fun and colourful? Fun comes into conversations a lot more than ever before. That social aspect, we've seen social, the proportion of social space, you know, almost triple. But it's work enabled, so you can do lots of things in those different spaces, but then providing that balance of individual space as well. So I think leadership has a huge part to play in physical design. It's been really enjoyable to work with, you know, really forward-thinking leaders about how they can, you know, tackle their next workplace.
Yeah, great. I think it's a great place to end. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Jonathan.